Since 1960, over 80,000 of these tracked aluminum boxes have rolled off production lines. Today, they are still grinding through the mud of modern conflicts, like the war in Ukraine. To understand why this single vehicle became so common, we have to look back at the late 1950s. The U.S. military needed a way to move infantry across an anticipated nuclear battlefield in Central Europe. The problem was that existing transports were either 18-ton steel behemoths that couldn't cross rivers, or complex twin-engine models that constantly broke down. This diagram illustrates the military's engineering solution, a fully enclosed hull made from 5083 aircraft-quality aluminum alloy. Because aluminum is lighter than steel, designers could use thicker plates, measuring up to 1.75 inches, to stop 7.62mm rifle fire and artillery shrapnel, all while keeping the combat weight down to just 12.3 tons. That specific weight-to-armor ratio gave the M113 massive baseline utility. It was light enough to be dropped from C-130 transport planes and buoyant enough to propel itself across rivers using its own tracks. U.S. Army doctrine at the time explicitly classified the M113 as a battle taxi. The instructions were clear: transport the troops to the edge of the combat zone under armor, drop the rear ramp so the infantry could dismount, and then retreat the vehicle safely to the rear. Because it was designed to avoid direct combat, its offensive capabilities were deliberately limited. The standard factory armament consisted of a single .5 caliber machine gun mounted on the commander's cupola, which left the gunner completely exposed from the waist up. This theoretical blueprint worked in controlled European training exercises. However, in an actual combat zone, enemy forces rarely wait for infantry to safely exit a vehicle before opening fire. By prioritizing transport efficiency over combat survivability, the designers created a vehicle that would struggle to withstand the tactical realities waiting for it in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Look at this photo of an M113 navigating deep mud. When the first units arrived in Vietnam in 1962, the South Vietnamese army quickly dubbed them Green Dragons for their ability to push through flooded rice paddies and dense jungle. But that harsh environment immediately challenged the original battle taxi doctrine. Soldiers quickly realized that dropping the rear ramp and dismounting into a dense tree line usually meant walking into an ambush. To survive, troops began using the transporter as a mounted assault vehicle, crashing through the brush and firing directly from the hull. Using a transport box for a direct assault exposed major engineering gaps. The Chrysler V8 gasoline engine was highly flammable, turning minor hits into lethal explosions. The thin aluminum floor couldn't withstand buried landmines, and the exposed machine gunners suffered massive casualty rates. The 1964 M113A1 upgrade was a direct response to these vulnerabilities. Engineers swapped the volatile gasoline engine for a Detroit diesel alternative. Diesel requires a much higher temperature to ignite, reducing the risk of a catastrophic fire while providing more torque to pull the vehicle through heavy mud. Meanwhile, the troops engineered their own survival kits. In this image, you can see soldiers welding armored shields around the commander's hatch and bolting extra M60 machine guns to the roof. This field modification became so common that the military eventually standardized it as the Armored Cavalry Assault Vehicle, or ASAV. The emergence of the A1 and the ASAV marked the moment where combat performance, rather than peacetime theory, began to steer the vehicle's mechanical future. By the late 1970s, the platform was facing a mechanical crisis. Decades of adding heavier weapons, extra armor, and specialized equipment pushed the original aluminum chassis past its limits, causing the suspension to buckle under its own weight. To address this, the 1979 M113A2 upgrade overhauled the undercarriage. Mechanics installed higher-strength torsion bars to increase ground clearance, added robust shock absorbers to absorb violent ground strikes, and relocated the radiator to optimize engine cooling for a heavier load. These mechanical fixes demanded a harsh compromise. The A2 upgrades pushed the vehicle's combat mass to 25,000 pounds. At that heavy combat weight, the vehicle entirely lost the buoyancy that originally allowed it to float across rivers. Then, in the late 1980s, the M113 faced another existential threat. It couldn't keep pace with the military's new, much faster M1 Abrams tanks, and its thin armor was an easy target for modern shaped-charge rocket-propelled grenades. The solution was the A3 Rise package, which dropped in a new 275-horsepower turbocharged engine. This 3D cutaway highlights the A3's crucial survivability modifications. Engineers removed the internal fuel tanks and placed them on external armored mounts on either side of the rear door. This freed up interior space and removed a major fire hazard from the troop compartment. Inside that passenger cabin, the A3 introduced Kevlar spall liners. If an anti-tank round penetrated the aluminum hull, these heavy internal mats were designed to catch the resulting spray of lethal metal fragments before they could strike the infantry inside. The entire evolutionary path of the M113 became a continuous, desperate race to retroactively up-armor a vehicle that was originally prized for being as lightweight as possible. By the time of the Iraq War in 2003, the platform had reached its absolute limits. Modern improvised explosive devices and heavy anti-tank weapons proved too lethal for the baseline aluminum hull to withstand. The U.S. military ultimately decided to pull the M113 out of frontline infantry fighting roles entirely, replacing it with much heavier, heavily armed machines like the Bradley and the armored multi-purpose vehicle. But being phased out of the front lines didn't end the M113 service. Its basic, boxy simplicity made it a modular canvas that could be repurposed by militaries all over the world. This photo shows how the Israel Defense Forces adapted the chassis for specialized urban combat. Known as the Zelda, they mounted heavy, perforated steel plates externally to pre-detonate incoming projectiles before they could even touch the aluminum hull. Across dozens of allied nations, the vehicle continues to thrive as a rear echelon workhorse. As seen in this convoy, that empty aluminum box is perfectly suited to serve as a mobile command post, a mortar carrier, or a protected medical evacuation unit. The M113 remains in service because it is a simple, reliable, and deeply adaptable box. While highly specialized machines often age out of their niche, this platform's capacity to be reconfigured for almost any role has kept it on the battlefield for over 60 years.